Next.js Conf was held today, and there is now a completely new caching mechanism inside of Next.js 15 with useCache. UseCache is a directive just like useServer and useClient, and it is quite powerful. It is in fact a successor of unstable cache, which is in experimental mode and still exists in Next.js today. But with useCache, you can not just cache expensive function calls, but you can also cache components as well as entire routes. So in this specific video, we are going to do a deep dive on useCache so you know exactly when to use it, where to use it, and where it fits in the entire ecosystem of caching. So let's dive in. Let's take a look at this useCache diagram to demonstrate what useCache does. But first, let's understand what useCache is. UseCache is a directive that allows us to cache a component, a function, or an entire file. If you add useCache directive under a function, under a component, or the top of the file, that function, component, and that file will be automatically cached. UseCache is an experimental feature. It's not ready for production, but you can definitely try it out by adding the experimental flag inside of next config file and also making sure that you are on the canary version as well. Let's take a look at a course example now. Right now, we have this specific app where we are displaying a list of dogs and also displaying a list of users. We are displaying a list of dogs from an API, and we're displaying a list of users from this mock API. We can simulate how many products we want to return through this API. So we can change it to 21 and 21 products will return. Right now, there are 12 products here as shown because that is what is being returned from the products. So if we take a look at a code of this specific project in page.tsx, we have a dog list. We have a suspense boundary that basically returns a fallback UI as the data is getting loaded. And we have a product list. If we take a look at dog list, it simply fetches the dogs, returns it, and we are looping through them and displaying it. Similarly, we're doing the same thing for products here as well. We have two logs. We have the product logs, and also if you go to dog list, then we also have this console log here in fetch dogs called as high fetching dogs. Now let's convert this page into a cacheable page. And the way we can do that is by adding useCache. Now, the minute we add useCache, everything inside this page is going to be cacheable. And that is why there's a lot of commonality between useClient and useCache. Anytime you add useClient, all the components, all its children also automatically become client components. Similarly, whenever you add useCache directive in that file, the entire file is going to get cached along with its children. So if you take a look at an example, let's just go ahead and clear this console. Let's do a hard refresh, go back, and now you can see high fetching dogs are in fact being fetched from the cache. So the first time it did fetch it, but later on it did fetch it from the cache because the first time it needed to download the data. Similarly, products got also fetched from the cache as well, which is exactly what we're looking for. And that's because the entire page has been cached. I have some good news. My free course on leveling up your Next.js skills with 10 Next.js best practices is finally ready. That means you can take this specific completely free course and start learning the Next.js best practices. We are going to cover topics like image optimization, removing console logs in production, streamlining redirects, server components versus server actions, and so much more. So the next 10 days is going to be really fun. This course is fully interactive, so you will be taking quizzes, you will be gaining points, so it's completely gamified. So if you're interested, check the link in the description below or just go to nextjscourse.dev and click on free course over here to sign up for this specific course. Now this is page level caching, route level caching. Let's move this useCache directive inside of product list. Now if you take a look at product list, it fetches a bunch of products. So if you go to fetch products, it's basically just executing the fetch request and returning it. Now here we are going to cache it by cache this function because we are trying to cache the products. We're going to add use cache directive here. The minute we do that, this page is not cacheable, neither is this page, but this function fetch products is. Now let's go ahead and see an example. Let's hard refresh the page. And now let's go to our mock API and change this to 4. Now when I do hard refresh a page, it doesn't change the value, and that's because it is being cached. This is what we have done so far. We have added use cache to function level caching. We have added cache to route level caching. But now we can also purge the cache as well, and it works very similar to how server actions work. Server actions, whenever you want to purge the cache, we can use this function called as revalidate path or revalidate tag. Revalidate path allows us to remove the cache, to delete the cache. Revalidate tag allows us to tag that specific cache, which we can then later on delete. Similarly, use cache also works the same way. Use cache has two functions called as cacheLife and cacheTag. cacheLife allows us, again, if we go back to the documentation here, cacheLife is used for time-based revalidation. So we can say how long we want the specific cache to be active and after how long we want it to purge and revalidate. And the other one is cacheTag, which is on-demand revalidation. It allows us to tag the cache in that instance and then later on purge the cache, which is very similar to how server action, revalidate path, and revalidate tag work as well. So you can think of revalidate tag very similar to cache tag to draw parallels and compare them. So now, if we want to basically purge the cache, remember we have a button here. Inside of product list, we have this button called as the interactive button. Inside of that, we are executing a server action, and this is a client component, but we're executing server action. And here we are calling it revalidate tag called as product details. So what we can do is we can just copy this product details and go to fetch products. And here, let's just go ahead and tag this. So in order for us to tag this, we're going to use product details and we're going to invoke a function called as cacheTag. Now remember, cacheTag is in fact importing from Next cache, and it is still unstable. So remember that. So now that we have tagged this specific cache, we can easily just go to the button to our server action and revalidate it. That is, purge the cache as well. So if we take a look at our example here, again, we're going to refresh the page. This is now 4 because we were changing things. But let's say I'm going to return 29. Again, refresh, nothing is going to happen. But let's click on purge and suddenly we have 29 products getting returned. This should be product, which is exactly how we want our use cache functionality to work. Now we have one more function that, just like we have cacheTag, we have cacheLife, like I talked about. And in cacheLife, we can essentially mention at the function level to set a revalidation period of how many days, of the number of days. So for instance, over here, we can say cacheLife. And here it does take quite a few properties, and we're just going to import cacheLife from Next cache as well. And here we can basically just tag it by days, by hours, by max, minutes, seconds, and so on. So if I say I want to do it hours, for instance, this means that this cache may be stale on clients for 5 minutes. If I say stale as 5 minutes before checking the server. Now, if the server receives a new request after 1 hour, this is the revalidate property, start revalidating new values in the background. But if the entry has no traffic for 1 day, which is the expiry, it will expire. Now, by adding the specific value of hours, this is how we can define our cacheLife. So I can easily say that I want this after hours or so on, or days. And so it gives us more granular caching controls thanks to cacheLife and use cache. And by default, if you don't specify anything, then it's 15 minutes. So that is something you need to keep in mind as well. And all of this is documented here as well. So going back to our diagram here, we have so far done function level caching and route level caching. You can also do component caching as well, wherein As long as the props can be serialized, that is, they are React Server Components friendly, then in that case, you can just say, create a cache store, a cache key will get allocated to it. And then with the serialized props, as long as the props don't change, it is going to be cached. But the minute the props changes, it's no longer going to be cached. Similarly, if you have in functions, if you have any network requests, any expensive database calls, any database requests, or even just like a very complex code that takes a long time to run, you could just also cache it as well, because you can cache any functions you like to. Then we have the route level caching that we saw, where the entire route will get cached. And because use cache works just like use client, but anytime you use cache as a directive at the top of the file, then anything inside it will also automatically get cached. Keep this in mind if you do care about client interactivity and re-rendering, because then you don't want to cache those elements. The other thing I want to mention is that use cache is in fact a successor of unstable cache. With unstable cache, you could cache expensive function operations, but the limitation was that it could only cache JSON data. Whereas with use cache, it can cache any data as long as it's serializable, and that is, it's React Server Components friendly. It can be expensive functions, components, routes, and so on. So that is essentially how use cache works. That is all for this specific video. If you enjoyed watching this video, please comment below and let me know what are your top questions about caching and what still confuses you, so I can create more content for you that will help you level up your Next.js skills, as there are so many caching mechanisms getting introduced these days. So thanks for watching. Bye for now.